The marble floors gleamed beneath the towering chandeliers of the city's most prestigious bank. Suits burst past one another like an endless tide, every face set with superiority. And into this world stepped Emily Carter, a waitress in a faded cafe uniform, her hand still smelling faintly of coffee and cinnamon. She had come only to ask a simple question about her account, but before she could even explain, the manager's eyes narrowed. "Miss, you don't belong here," he said, his voice slicing through the lobby. A ripple of snickers followed as a guard escorted her to the door. Emily walked out in silence, cheeks flushed, heart aching, not from poverty, but from humiliation. The bank's glass doors closed behind her like a sentence. Yet what none of them knew was that this story was far from over. Because the very next day, those same bankers, those same customers, and that same arrogant manager would lift their heads to see Emily's face glowing from every banner, every screen, every advertisement of the bank itself. The woman they had cast aside was about to become the face they couldn't ignore. The next morning began like any other for Emily Carter. She tied her apron at the small cafe on the corner, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and greeted regulars with the warmth that had made her beloved in the neighborhood. But beneath the polite smile lingered the sting of the previous day, the sting of being told she didn't belong in a place where she had every right to be. That humiliation replayed in her mind with relentless clarity, the way the marble floors had amplified every step as she crossed the bank's lobby, the cold disdain in the manager's eyes, and the laughter from strangers who had joined in her embarrassment without knowing her name. Emily had only gone there to fix an error with her paycheck deposit, nothing more. Yet she had been treated like an intruder. Word of the incident had already begun to spread in small circles. A barista from another cafe who happened to be in the bank whispered about the waitress who got thrown out. Someone else who witnessed the scene recounted it to friends over dinner, embellishing the cruelty of the moment. To Emily, it felt like her humiliation had grown legs and walked across the city. Inside the bank, Richard Dalton, the manager who had dismissed her so casually, barely remembered her face. To him, she was just another interruption in a day filled with meetings and numbers. He recounted the moment to his colleagues as though it were amusing, another example of keeping standards high. His peers chuckled in agreement, reinforcing his arrogance. "Can you imagine," Dalton said, swirling his glass of whiskey that evening, "a waitress thinking she could just stroll into our bank? This isn't a cafe where she pours coffee. It's a temple of finance." The men around him roared with laughter. None of them questioned the cruelty of his actions. In their minds, wealth justified everything, and appearance was the clearest sign of worth. Meanwhile, Emily worked her shift with quiet resilience. She poured coffee, served sandwiches, and refilled sugar jars, all while the memory of the bank gnawed at her. Customers noticed her distracted air and offered kind words, but kindness didn't erase the sting of being treated as invisible. Late that evening, after closing the cafe, Emily walked past the bank once more. Its gleaming windows reflected the city's lights, cold and impersonal. She stood outside for a long moment, staring at the building that had made her feel so small. She whispered under her breath, "One day, they'll see me differently." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise to herself. What Emily didn't know was that her life was already shifting in unseen ways. A week earlier, a marketing team had visited her cafe. They had been searching for a fresh face for the bank's new campaign, someone authentic, someone real who could break through the polished images that people no longer trusted. One of the executives had been struck by Emily's warmth as she served them coffee, her ability to make a stranger feel like an old friend. Her smile lingered in their memory longer than the taste of the cappuccino. They had taken her picture, with her permission, explaining vaguely that they were collecting reference images. Emily had thought little of it at the time. After all, people often snapped photos of the cafe's latte art or cozy atmosphere. She never imagined that her photo would end up pinned on the vision board of $1 million marketing project. Back inside the bank, as Dalton preened and bragged, the marketing team was preparing their presentation for the board of directors. They revealed mock-ups of billboards, posters, and digital ads, all featuring Emily's radiant face. Her apron was still visible in some shots, But that was the point: authenticity, relatability, the warmth that Dalton and his peers so obviously lacked. The board loved it. "This is exactly the direction we need," one executive declared. "People are tired of polished models who look untouchable. They want someone real, someone approachable. This young woman embodies trust." By the time Dalton went to bed that night, smug in his superiority, the campaign had already been approved. The marketing budget was signed, schedules locked in, and Emily's smile was destined to appear across the city by dawn. But for now, she didn't know any of this. She only knew the weight of humiliation, the ache of being seen as less. And as she curled up in her modest apartment above the cafe, she prayed quietly for strength. Tomorrow was another day, and she resolved to face it as she always did, with humility and grace, even if the world refused to return it. Across town, printers were already roaring to life, spitting out posters larger than life. Emily's face, captured in a candid moment of kindness, would soon tower over bus stops, shine on digital billboards, and fill the bank's glossy brochures. The very institution that had cast her out was about to build its image on hers. And so, as the clock ticked toward midnight, the stage was set. The humiliation was complete, but the seeds of transformation had already been planted. In less than 24 hours, the waitress who didn't belong would become the symbol the bank couldn't live without. Before we dive into what happens when Emily's quiet strength turns the entire city upside down, let me ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever been told you didn't belong, only to prove everyone wrong later? That's exactly where this story is heading. And if you're loving the ride so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Because on this channel, every story is about turning humiliation into triumph, and you won't want to miss the next one. Go ahead, join the community, and let's keep standing up for the Emilys of the world together. The next morning, the bank's marble floors gleamed just as they had before, but beneath their shine lurked whispers of arrogance and entitlement. Emily Carter, however, had not slept a restless night. She had spent her evening at the cafe she worked in, sitting with a steaming cup of tea and a notebook that bore the sketches of her secret life, designs, slogans, and creative visions she had quietly nurtured for years. What no one at the bank knew was that Emily was not just a waitress, she was a brilliant self-taught designer who had once dreamed of entering the advertising world, only to be turned away because she didn't have the look. Her humiliation had lit a fuse. That night, she poured her energy into finalizing a proposal for a local competition that had been announced weeks earlier, the chance to rebrand one of the city's largest financial institutions. And, with poetic irony, the bank that had humiliated her was the one offering the contract. Emily submitted her work at the last possible minute. Her hands trembled as she clicked send, not from doubt in her skills but from the memory of being shoved out the glass doors while strangers laughed. She knew this was her shot, not just at a contract, but at dignity. Days later, when the finalists were announced, Emily's name appeared at the very top. Her concept was bold yet human, a campaign that reframed the bank's image from cold elitism to a beacon of opportunity. The visuals were fresh, accessible, and powerful, banking not just for the wealthy in suits, but for the everyday dreamer who brewed coffee, who swept floors, who worked late into the night. The judges, a mix of marketing experts and executives, were stunned. Rumors spread across the city's advertising circles. The mysterious Emily Carter had redefined what the bank could look like. The bank's CEO, however, had no idea she was the same waitress escorted out of his building only days before. The final presentation was set in the very lobby where she had been humiliated. Emily walked in again, not in her cafe uniform but in a simple, elegant outfit she had saved for rare occasions, clean lines, no extravagance, just authenticity. The same manager who had sneered at her blinked in confusion, his jaw tightening when he realized who she was. But now, the crowd was not laughing. They were curious, watching her climb the stage. Emily began her pitch with steady words. She spoke not only of logos and taglines but of values, of people who had been overlooked, just as she had. Her designs lit up the massive screen behind her, diverse faces, warm colors, everyday moments elevated into symbols of empowerment. Her voice, though soft, carried across the hall, silencing the murmurs. As she clicked through each slide, the judge's eyes widened. One leaned forward, scribbling notes furiously. Another whispered to the CEO, who simply stared, his expression unreadable. The manager who had once called her out shifted uncomfortably, beads of sweat dotting his forehead. Then came the final reveal. The centerpiece of her campaign was an image of herself, not as a glamorous model, but as she had been, a waitress in a cafe uniform, smiling with genuine warmth. Beneath the image read the slogan she had crafted, "Banking for all of us." The room erupted in murmurs. Some gasped. Others nodded slowly, as if realizing they were seeing something historic. One of the judges, a respected advertising executive with decades of experience, stood up. "This," he said, pointing at the screen, "is not just branding. This is a movement." Applause broke out, first scattered, then thunderous. Emily stood firm, her heart racing, but her expression calm. She didn't gloat. She didn't sneer. She simply let her work speak. When the CEO rose, silence fell again. He stepped forward, extended his hand, and said, "Miss Carter, you've just won the contract." The very bank that had cast her out was now begging for her face, her vision, and her leadership to define their public image. The same marble floors that had reflected her shame now echoed with applause for her triumph. And for the first time in her life, Emily realized she had not only reclaimed her dignity but transformed it into undeniable power. The applause still echoed through the grand hall when Emily stepped down from the stage. For a moment, she simply stood there, breathing in the sight of faces turned toward her with admiration rather than disdain. The memory of her humiliation was still sharp, but it was now wrapped in the glow of vindication. She had not just won a contract, she had changed the narrative. The judges congratulated her, shaking her hand with genuine warmth. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes. But amidst the celebration, Emily remained grounded. She bowed her head politely, her smile modest. There was no need for her to boast. Her triumph was already written across every astonished face in the room. The crowd erupted into chatter. Ordinary bank employees whispered to one another, marveling at how the waitress they had dismissed was now the chosen visionary. Even the most skeptical executives had to admit that Emily's campaign was revolutionary. It wasn't just about sleek visuals, it was about telling a story that resonated with millions who had once felt invisible. Meanwhile, justice unfolded quietly but unmistakably. The arrogant manager who had humiliated Emily found himself cornered by whispers of disapproval. His colleagues gave him sidelong glances, and a board member made a pointed remark, "If this is how you treat clients, perhaps you're not suited to represent our values." Within weeks, he was demoted, his once lofty reputation in tatters. The guards who had escorted her out with smug superiority now stood stiffly in the background, their eyes avoiding hers. They would not lose their jobs, but they would forever carry the sting of knowing they had played a part in trying to crush a woman who had risen higher than they could ever imagine. As for the CEO, his polished exterior cracked. He had prided himself on presiding over a bank that symbolized status, yet here was proof that authenticity could outshine elitism. He signed the contract with Emily personally, but the gesture carried an undercurrent of humility. He was no longer the man in power doing a favor for a young waitress, he was the leader of a bank that needed her vision more than she needed theirs. Emily's campaign launched within weeks. Her face appeared on billboards across the city, not airbrushed, not dressed in couture, but smiling as herself, the same way she had at the cafe. The slogan, "Banking for all of us," spread like wildfire. Customers who had once felt unwelcome walked into the bank with renewed confidence. Families, workers, students, all felt seen in ways they never had before. Public reaction was overwhelming. Articles praised the campaign as groundbreaking. Social media lit up with stories of people sharing their own humiliations and triumphs, tagging Emily's name as a beacon of hope. The bank's image, once stiff and elitist, transformed into one of inclusivity and opportunity. But amidst the noise and praise, Emily chose a quieter path. She returned to her cafe shifts, at least for a while. Her co-workers cheered when they saw her face on television screens, teasing her lovingly. Customers who had once overlooked her now greeted her with respect. Yet Emily never acted differently. She still refilled cups of coffee with the same gentle smile, still listened when someone needed to vent about their day. Fame had not altered her essence. One evening, as she wiped down tables, a young woman approached her shyly. "Miss Carter," she said, holding a notebook close to her chest, "I've always wanted to design, but people laugh at me. They say I'll never make it." Emily paused, then smiled warmly. "They said the same about me. Don't let their voices be louder than your own." She placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Start where you are. Your story matters. And one day, they'll see it too." It was in that moment Emily realized her greatest victory wasn't the contract, the fame, or even the billboards. It was the ripple effect of her story, the way it ignited courage in others who had been silenced by arrogance. Justice had been served. The arrogant were humbled, the overlooked were uplifted, and the city itself had been reminded that dignity does not come from status, but from authenticity. Emily didn't need the bank's approval to define her worth. She had proven to the world, and to herself, that she was enough all along. And so, while the billboards kept shining and the campaign reshaped an empire, Emily Carter quietly carried on with her life, unchanged in spirit. Her triumph was not in being seen by millions, but in never losing sight of who she truly was. And that's the heart of Emily's story, a woman the world dismissed, who turned humiliation into history. What began as a moment of cruelty in a marble lobby became the spark for a movement that inspired thousands. And here's the truth, it isn't just Emily's story. It's a reminder that each of us, no matter how small or unseen, has the power to rewrite the script. If this story moved you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you turned rejection into victory? Your story might give courage to someone else scrolling through today. And if you want more tales where justice flips the script and the humble rise above the arrogant, hit that follow button right now. Join this community where every voice matters, and where every story proves that dignity always wins in the end.